legal framework is primarily based on civil law, but it also acknowledges the diverse culture and religious practices of its citizens. Understanding, of course, the legal status of Muslim marriages involves exploring their recognition, registration, and implications for various aspects such as inheritance, financial rights, and divorce. Now we're going to be chatting with Attorney Rumana Mahomed. She actually runs a niche practice as an attorney and fiduciary practitioner in Musgrave, Russia, in Durban. She specializes in winding up deceased estates, drafting of wills, trusts, and advising on estate planning and Islamic personal law, marriage, divorce, and inheritance. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Rumana. Welcome back to Urban Women.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran for having me. It's always such a pleasure to join you in the studio. Thanks,
Alhamdulillah.
Raja.
We can see you busy, but thank you so much for taking your time out, connecting with us, and sharing some very important information with us. Now, let's jump into it. Is Muslim marriage legally recognized in South Africa now, or are they recognized? Is the correct way for me to ask you?
So that's a bit of a loaded question.
Uh-huh.
Muslim marriages are recognized in specific circumstances. Okay. Since a few years ago, Muslim marriages were recognized provided that there was a claim in an estate where the deceased spouse did not leave a will. Then Muslim marriages were recognized insofar as the surviving spouse's inheritance was concerned. Okay,
Uh-huh.
if the deceased spouse was involved in a motor vehicle accident and the surviving spouse needed to claim from the road accident fund, then that marriage was recognized. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And those were the only two sort of scenarios that Muslim marriages have been recognized. Then
Okay.
recently, the Constitutional Court delivered a judgment which compelled government to give legal recognition to Muslim marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And government had, in fact, until the end of June to pass some form of legislation. Since then, of course, government has been drafting lots of different bills for public comment to give recognition to all religious marriages as a consequence of this judgment. The interim order, however, and an interim order was given on the basis that this would be the position until government passed legislation. So the interim order was that Muslim marriages would be given legal recognition in a divorce scenario. So if
Mm-hmm.
parties who are married by nikah only needed to get a divorce, and in your typical situation, you'd have perhaps the wife who's struggling to get a talaq from her husband,
Mm-hmm.
or struggling to get some sort of maintenance from her husband. Okay, then as a consequence of this interim order, that wife can now approach the courts, so approach the civil courts for the dissolution of that Muslim marriage.
Okay.
So that brings the next scenario, that Muslim marriages are recognized in that scenario where one party wants to institute divorce proceedings against the other, and they can now access the courts, which makes it much easier because up until that point, a couple or the party lodging that application had to first justify that they had a legitimate marriage in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
constitution. So it just kind of takes that step away. So it's a limited recognition, but it is a recognition and it's a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction indeed. What are then the legal requirements for a Muslim marriage to be recognized, Sister Rumana?
So, if we had to, prior to this judgment, or even prior to the legislation that we are hoping to achieve, we get from government, a Muslim marriage would only be recognized legally or in these scenarios, or if you went to register a civil marriage. And then too, it's not a full recognition, because when you go to register a civil marriage, you are getting recognition for civil marriage and all the consequences that flow from there,
Right.
you know. So as much as we can assume that, okay, if I have a civil marriage, my Muslim marriage is recognized, it's not 100% correct. It's your civil
Okay.
marriage that gets recognized. But you know
Uh-huh.
what's wonderful about our country is that we have a constitution that gives recognition to our religious belief, gives
Alhamdulillah.
allows us to practice our faith, and therefore we can use or we can justify being married or, um, or use our nikah certificate and Islamic marriage in different scenarios to
Okay.
prove marriage, and those particular departments would give recognition to it. A typical example is SARS. So as
Uh-huh.
much as there isn't this blanket recognition in all sectors of Muslim marriages, but SARS recognizes Muslim marriages, and yes, um, quite conveniently so. But at the
Mm.
same time, I think it just speaks to the fact that government institutions are changing the way they deal with religious and cultural marriages, which is very, very different from the landscape that we've come from during apartheid.
Absolutely. Well, it's so nice to know that we make up, the country, and to know that they are obviously now considering our rights as well. Can a Muslim marriage be registered with civil authorities after the nikah?
Well, look, what's in place at the moment is that you have Muslim marriage officers who are recognized by the Department of Home Affairs. Okay.
Right.
And when they officiate over your nikah, they do a simultaneous registration of your marriage at the Department of Home Affairs.
Okay.
So, and in a sense, there is that registration at Home Affairs because at some point, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a note that the parties were married by nikah as well.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. But I think to answer your question more directly, it doesn't automatically happen. A lot of,
Mhm.
excuse me, a lot of people believe that Muslim marriages are recognized, and if I have a nikah marriage, I'm fine. It's not the case. The thing is that there is, you have to back up your Islamic nikah marriage with a civil registration if you want to afford, if you want to get access to all the protections that the law offers in terms of civil marriages. And that's what's
Gotcha.
good about the current case law and the interim order, because not only is the spouse getting the dissolution of the marriage confirmed,
Hmm.
but the spouse is also getting access to all the other civil law protections. So interim maintenance. So we talk about nafaka, we have that in place during the idda period. At least
Yes.
through this mechanism, you can apply and enforce that.
And enforce.
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, as much as our judicial authorities like Darul Ihsan and the Jamiyat play a significant role in mediating our divorce matters and trying to help us reach conclusion, they don't
Uh-huh.
they don't have the legal they don't have the ability to enforce their decisions.
Correct.
And
Correct.
so
And we very
when
much shy away from it.
yes, and when the one party refuses to abide by those decisions, it becomes problematic for the other, and then you need to go a step further, and that's where the civil courts come in to protect you.
Absolutely. You are so right
Mm.
because then that's when they will say we're going to now take legal action because Islamically you're not adhering to your level of consciousness. So,
Yes.
what would you say, Sister Romana? How does the recognition of a Muslim marriage then affect a spouse's inheritance and financial rights as well?
Okay. So at this point, as a consequence of that interim order, um, spouses can claim interim, and I want to just talk about the financial aspects first. Spouses can claim the interim maintenance. Spouses who have uh, uh, their Islamic marriage as well as a civil marriage where they are married out of community or property, those spouses who have contributed significantly to the growth and the well being of the other spouse's wealth can now claim a portion of that wealth for all the efforts they've put in. Now, that becomes quite important, as much as, some parties may say that this is a marriage out of community of property, and in terms of Islamic law, our marriages align with that legal system. But the
Correct.
reality is that it becomes in terms of our default understanding of what the roles and responsibilities are of a husband and a wife in a marriage. The husband is supposed to take care of all the financial maintenance aspects in the home, including the financial maintenance of the wife. And where he defaults in that, or where the wife contributes to the financial aspects of that home, it's almost a liability being created in the estate of the husband because he owes her that reimbursement. And so those in terms of the financial consequences, I think it's important for us to access the court for those reimbursements, because very often husbands will say, well, these are your obligations, but they don't consider what their obligations are, especially around finances.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the
Mm-hmm.
aspect of inheritance, I must say that inheritance can become quite tricky if parties don't leave a will, because the will is going to speak to the intentions of the testator or the testatrix. If you don't leave a will, then whether you are married by civil law or whether you are married by Islamic law, the wife is allocated a portion of that inheritance. If you are married, if your husband passes away without a will, then the wife gets a share that may be equal to the children, or maybe even a little more, and that
Mm-hmm.
is part of our civil law. But
Right.
there's definitely an impact, a positive impact in terms of securing the inheritance of a spouse at this point, now that there is more and more recognition given to Muslim marriages.
Absolutely. Well, we always adhere to Sharia first. And of course, there we go on the legal side, there's some sort of security. Notwithstanding that, first, we obviously implement what Sharia states. Thank you so much for your time, Sister Rahman.
Absolutely.
Due to time, we're going to have to wrap up here, but we'd love to chat with you again, inshallah, this very important topic. We wish you a lovely day further, lovely Jum'ah tomorrow, and an awesome weekend, inshallah. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And that was Rumana Mahomed. She is an attorney and chatting with us all